BBC 5 Live.
Yeah, Real Sounds of Africa to once again kick off our World Football phone-in. So we're talking football in Africa and South America this morning. And, of course, players from over there playing in our leagues. And on the African continent is our own Mark Gleeson, the oracle of African football. We call him the Springboka Junior. Good morning.
Good morning to you, Dotun.
Yeah, you didn't allow me to finish the full complement of your tributes. It can't leave out the Springboka Junior. That's the important
very kind
part.
of you, sir, but...
Yeah. Never mind the oracle of African football. You're the Springboka Junior. That's what we want to tell people. So, any questions on African football for Mark, feel free. You can text him on 85058, email upallnight@bbc.co.uk, or give him a call on 08085 909 693. And likewise for the Legendinho Tim Vickery, who is over in Rio covering South American football. I think I've done you justice enough times. Don't need to say any more about you.
No, that's more than enough. Evening, Gleeson. We're about 7 months away from a best of three, me and Gleeson. There are 3 Africa versus South America clashes in the World Cup. Egypt against Uruguay, Senegal against Colombia, and the one that probably interests us all most, Nigeria against Argentina. So who's going to have the best out of our best of 3? Good evening, everyone.
Yeah, okay, you've started off hostilities in a very gentle way. Who's going to have the best of those 3, if I may ask you, oracle of African football, Mark Gleeson?
Silly question. It would be Africa all the way, sir.
I'm a Nigerian, and even I don't believe that. Unfortunately. Anyway, let's kick off with the questions from listeners. 08085 909 693. I'm sure we've got lots of questions for both Mark and Tim, and feel free. We're taking your questions from now. This is an interesting one. I haven't seen this story, but one of our listeners has tweeted it. He says, following on from the story about Lazio fans, this is Paul who's tweeted this, following on from the story about Lazio fans leaving bad reviews for a referee's cafe on TripAdvisor, caught my eye as well. Are there any other examples of fans using strange methods to get back at officials? Mark, do you want to take that first?
Here the method is pretty perfunctory. It's the chanting of the word referee, referee, referee. Then you know the man in the middle is in some trouble.
It's as simple as that. How about in South America, Tim?
Yeah, the best example I can think of doesn't come from real life. It comes from a TV show quite recently, a little half-hour comedy, various episodes. It was very nicely done, about the life of a referee, and this particular referee, who was kind of bald. I always hate bald referees. I swear at them all the more. I was at Wembley last Saturday, freezing my proverbials off with Tottenham against Swansea, and there was a bald referee, so he had to be shouted at. But anyway, this referee is a fictional referee in this series. He's going through a divorce case, and it's a legal argument about who's going to get custody of the kids. And it turns out that the judge who's going to decide is the director of a football club whose team has just lost a game, for which he blames the man in the middle, who was our friend, the bald referee. He didn't get custody of the kids.
Why did you have to bring in the follicle challenge, please? Bill in New Jersey says, here in the States, we're about to elect a new president of the US Soccer Federation, our version of the FA. The leading candidates are a couple of business figures. Do the panelists believe that it's better to have an FA president that's played the game at a high level, or should an FA president have some business savvy in order to run a large operation like a national footballing federation? I heard you groan there, Tim, so I'm going to Mark first.
No, it wasn't a groan. It was a doubt, really. I'm not 100% sure. You can see points on both sides. I think the experience of ex-players is absolutely vital at some point in the organisation. It's absolutely necessary. Sometimes I worry about the cult of the great ex-player. And if you've ever seen great ex-players, they tend to kind of lord it around, and they're surrounded by people hanging on their every word, and this isn't good for anyone's development. So you worry sometimes a little bit about, because I think if you're going to be an ex-player who moves on to something like this, you have to separate yourself. You have to separate your past on the field from your present, and you've got to keep learning stuff. You've got to do your business courses and so on, in order to that your experience on field can be made fruitful and isn't just you sitting around telling anecdotes. So experience from other fields is also clearly interesting. But in a strict business sense, football is such a strange business, if it is a business at all. Because your businessman comes in and he's got a different kind of score. His score is the profit or the share price or something like that. And football is a very strange kind of business in that sense. So I think we've seen sometimes the kind of strict business ideas fail. Go on,
have you been on the Kachaka tonight? Because I did say that Mark should go for it first, but then...
Oh, sorry.
I know it's Christmas.
I would have been quite happy to have some thinking time, so I'm against my own interests.
I know it's Feliz, whatever it is, but lay off the Kachaka for tonight, will you?
Kashasa.
Oh, right, Kashasa. Well,
right, now I know where you're coming from.
Yeah, Kashasa to you, Kashaka to me. What's the difference? Tomato, tomatoes. And
Shaka Khan.
Yeah.
Shaka Khan.
That was very good. I'm sorry, he scored a free kick in that one, Mark. I couldn't be that. Anyway,
left floundering as I dive left and the ball goes underneath.
Exactly.
But listen, the very few ex-football players that we've had that have become federation presidents or vice presidents have been very poor, disappointingly so. And as Tim points out, that they've come on the back of a reputation as a great player and given very little else. Have had little savvy in the political arena, a little bit to contribute in the business sense. And really got there on reputation and have gone almost as quickly as they've arrived. They really have been disappointing in Africa, and I think I really think you need someone with tremendous business acumen, and more so today. With the business of football being so big, on this continent you find often FA presidents are neither. They're normally lackeys of political figures, be they family members or close friends. And as a result, the administration of the game on this continent has a history of poverty over the last 30, 40 years. It's one of the big things that's retarded the growth of African football.
I'm glad that you brought in the business of football, because I think that's really where the question goes to, alludes to, in any case, that football is now a business much more than it is about the experience of former professionals or whatever it is. But do you not have to be careful, especially in Africa, be just careful what you wish for in that respect, that football then becomes a business and it takes the quality of the enjoyment, the spectacle, or even the social aspect of it to another level, takes it somewhere else?
Yeah, but I think there are going to be many more positives than negatives in that situation. I think you're going to find that, decent backing, decent development, decent money in the African game, which is, it's nowhere like the game in Europe, and it's, maybe a little bit closer to some of the poorer countries in South America, but it really is way behind in terms of that kind of development. And there are a lot of people who'd like to be involved in football, or a lot of kids who'd like to play football who are just left behind because there isn't the necessary money in the game that there is elsewhere. And I think a little bit of business acumen in the right places would certainly help African football much better than than it might lead it down the wrong path, which of course, there is the potential for that always.
Mm. Oh, by the way, somebody has pointed out already, Tim, Mike in Norwich pointed out, wasn't the best referee in the world once upon a time bald? Was it Colina?
Colina.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, was he the best in the world? He was the most fearsome in the world, probably because he was bald.
And he was the best self-publicist too. I thought he was fairly mediocre, and he made his name on that ugly face of his.
Yeah, yes. And Richard has pointed out that how should I say this delicately? In White Hart Lane, in the old days, you lot used to chant "Who's your father?" at somebody. Anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's
the
pretty international.
Well,
there's a great story. It's told in that wonderful Eduardo Galeano book, Football in Sun and Shadow, the great Uruguayan writer who left us a few years back. He tells a story of a referee in Ecuador, and it's announced to the crowd that the referee is taking on these duties despite the fact that his parents have both just died in quick succession, and everyone applauds, and the referee sits there, stands there moved with his head bowed, and then 5 minutes into the game he gives a decision that the home crowd doesn't like, so they start singing "Orphan of a so and so," so the goodwill to all men didn't last very long if you're a referee.
Jack in London is with us. Good morning, Jack.
Good morning, Dotun. Good morning to Mark in South Africa, and good night, good evening to
well
to
done.
Tim.
Oh, well done. You know the time references in the different countries. I love it.
Well, yeah, I have a habit of being in different time zones. Though I'm in West London at the moment, I when I spoke to the person answering the phone, I was a bit inarticulate because I hadn't had coffee. But
well, it's because West London is half an hour.
A test match, which I've got a tablet in front of me, silent, and I've had a good 7 hours sleep, and now I'm thoroughly into somewhere in Hawaii in terms of time zone.
You see,
at the moment.
if sleep was easy, they'd call it football. Anyway, you've got a great question for Mark. Go ahead.
Well, actually, I have that question for Mark. But having had coffee, I have another question. But before that, I just want to slip in two things. Not really questions right now.
Is this the equivalent of a sub-question?
I really want to hear from Tim about Eduardo Galeano at some point.
But not if he's going to do an accent, though. You would agree.
And one of my heroes, Galeano, one of my kind of 5 heroes of my lifetime as a writer.
Okay, maybe you can come back to that in just a moment.
Oh yeah, another time.
No, tonight. But what's the question for Mark then?
Well, actually, the question I'd much more want to ask than the one I put under pressure kind of before coffee. Actually, the first question I want to ask is about TV in South Africa, and the fact that my closest friend in the Midlands, north of Durban, he gets to watch every game being played. And how has it worked out that in South Africa, perhaps more than other places around the world, you actually can see all the games? And what has happened, and what is there an effect in South Africa where there have been, among black and white people, kind of supports for different British teams and so on? But and it may connect to the original thing, which is kind of what is happening to football and and money and football in South Africa and Southern and Central Africa.
Yeah, we've just been talking slightly about that, Mark. But in terms of the television issue, though, does Jack have a point there?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the best place not to watch English football is England. There's particularly on television. It's everywhere else but in your backyard. And here, the satellite, it is on satellite television, so you need a decoder and a subscription. And so it's not particularly cheap, but you can watch every single Premier League game, majority of them live. And if they're not live, they'll be on in the next 90 minutes after the game that's on at the moment. So, that's on the...
How about local games?
Local games are done... I in fact worked for that broadcaster that is being referred to, and we're doing 6 of the 8 league matches this weekend. We did one last night here in Cape Town. I'm off to Durban this morning. We're doing one this evening in Durban, one tomorrow afternoon. So we have fulsome coverage of the local league. We used to have the Bundesliga, the Italian and the Spanish live as well, all of the games, but they've dropped the Germans and the Italians. So it's just Spanish now and English football. The English football is massively popular. It's perhaps not as pervasive, the popularity in South Africa, as it is perhaps in a place like Kenya, where it has a massive impact on the local league. People much prefer to sit in bars or at home watching an English game than they do a local match. Here, there is a distinct following and a distinct separation of the local league and English football, but you do find more and more the product is sort of seeping across and impacting a little bit on the domestic game. And you find what was exclusively in the white community, I would say in the 70s and 80s, a following of English football in terms of people wearing replica shirts. Not that there were many replica shirts in those days, but having a team and following them and buying the Shoot magazine and that kind of stuff has changed completely. Everybody across the colour line now has a British team that they follow or sports a Barcelona or a Real Madrid, and that really comes from television.
There is for want of a phrase, a tribalistic aspect to it as well, isn't there? Or at least there is in West Africa, I know, because I remember covering a story a couple of years ago when there was some issue in football over here, and it was replicated by the fans of those teams it concerned over here, but in like Nigeria. So they were fighting each other because their equivalent fans over here had some kind of issue.
Yeah, well, look, again, Nigeria and Ghana and places like that, English football is absolutely massive, and the satellite channel make an absolute fortune out of the sales of decoders and things like that. I think that particular incident you're talking about, I think I might remember. It was a little bit of an anomaly. I would feel that there are big pockets of supporter groups for the big established sides. But the passion for the game is, or the passion for those teams revolves really around the 90 minutes of the football and the wearing of the shirt here and there, and that's it really. It's very difficult, I still think, for someone from Abiotuko or from Stellenbosch in South Africa to have that extreme passion for an Arsenal or a Tottenham or a Liverpool or a Man United. I think they sort of affiliate themselves because they're big, they're big brands internationally. They don't affiliate themselves because it's a real footballing passion in the way that a local would in the UK.
And Tim, that Galeano author, who's he?
Eduardo Galeano, the Uruguayan writer. Was a wonderful, warm voice of humanism. Lots of optimism mixed with a kind of Uruguayan melancholy. Wrote a great book about football history, football in sun and shadow. Not just history, but full of observations as well, and reasonably translated into English. And an excellent antidote to the more Eurocentric histories that you'll see elsewhere. So that's a book that comes thoroughly recommended. And what really comes out of it is Galeano's love for the game. And Galeano, he wasn't a man of football. He was a sociologist, a writer. But during World Cups, all business was suspended. Anyone going to his house would find a big notice outside. Normal business suspended for World Cups. So that book, Football in Sun and Shadow, becomes highly recommended. The book that he's probably most remembered for is The Open Veins of Latin America. Book that he wrote as a young man, I think in the early 70s, which Hugo Chavez, the late Venezuelan president, presented to Barack Obama when he was US president as a history of how Latin America has been exploited and so on. Towards the end of his life, Galeano distanced himself a little bit from the book. He said he would write a different kind of book these days, but still, that's an interesting history for someone wanting to learn about this part of the world. But everything that Galeano wrote and said, there's a real sense of humanism that comes through, and he was someone that I always wanted to meet, but sadly I will not get the chance.
It's the conundrum of authors, isn't it, that what you write as a young man will stay with you. The portrait of an artist as a young man will stay with you into old age, even though you think, what an idiot I was as a young person. But there you go.
Has that happened to the Sperm Bandits as well? Have you been kind of typecast as the author of that?
That was uncalled for. I will have you know, the prequel to that was, can I have my balls back, please? And I will have you know that there are many men behind bars who have read that book and have written to me over many years to say now they understood where they went wrong, particularly in their relationships. Yeah, don't knock that one. The Sperm Bandits was, it wasn't. It wasn't the anyway. Moving on very swiftly. Jacob in Oxford. I was trying to explain to our beloved audience, many of whom, by the way, have been texting and tweeting for the last couple of weeks since we had the 20th anniversary special, of which I must thank you very much as well, Mark. We haven't thanked you sufficiently for that, but people thoroughly enjoyed that 20th anniversary special 2 weeks ago, I must say. Jacob in Oxford has got something to get off his chest. He ain't happy at the moment, and I'll let him get it off his chest in a moment or two. So Jacob in Oxford says, Dotun, the Legendinho and the Springboka Junior. Listening for the first time live, having listened to the podcast every morning before work. I've got two questions. One, as an avid football kit fan, which of the clubs in your respective regions has the best kit? And two, do you share my annoyance that club shirt sponsors crinkle in the wash? And there's more now than ever before. Okay, glad I got that off my chest. I can sleep easy now. So, do you want to try that first, Mark? Best kit first. Your region.
In South Africa, I suppose the one that's widely recognised and is perhaps the biggest seller is Kaiser Chiefs. It's a gold and black. It can come in stripes or in a sort of very fancy. Well, they change it all the time, I suppose, to rip people off as much as they possibly can. With
whoa! I wouldn't say that. I mean, I would say that maybe they change as much as they can to keep the opposition guessing and putting the opposition off. You know, there are many perspectives as to what the role of a football shirt is.
This is true, but they do essentially change them all the time to sell as many as they possibly can to hammer the poor fans. So I'm going to stick to my original.
I know you are. I was trying to sit on the fence, and I was looking with one eye at our legal team over in the corner.
But I like. I mean, I've always liked the Ajax shirt from Holland, and we have an Ajax Cape Town here. They replicate whatever's worn in Holland. That's always a classic football shirt. And the green of Amazulu is always caught my eye, and I've quite fancied it. I must admit I've never ever bought or worn a local football shirt, which is maybe something I should look into. But maybe 20 kilograms less, we might try it on. Some wears football shirts because there's obviously little scope to undo those top 3-4 buttons to get that medallion dangling and the.
But how do you get rid of the sponsor stuff once it crinkles in the wash? Is more pertinent to Jacob in Oxford. If you've got any tips on that, let us know, by the way. 08085 909 693. So, Tim, considering that football shirts nowadays are used to scare the opposition, what about over your side? Which is the best kit?
Well, I mean, Jacob's point about the sponsors thing is especially pertinent in South America because they have so many, they just fill them up. There'll be a sponsor on the sleeves and a sponsor on the front and a sponsor on the back. So if they're crinkling, they are ruining the value of a very expensive shirt. What's my favourite one? My favourite one isn't a club; it's a national side. It's a predictable one, I think, but it's one that lots of people have, and that's Peru. I'm a sucker for a sash. You get that red sash on the. Don't usually like red a lot, but that red sash on the white background with Peruvian skin colour, it just works wonderfully well, and it's a really evocative moment for me because the first World Cup I can just about remember 1970. And I just turned 5 before the tournament. Was available for selection. That Sir Ralph didn't call me up on that occasion. But there were some kids around the block who were collecting a football card, collecting the stickers. And the first football sticker I ever saw was a Peruvian. I think it was Ramon Mifflin, the winger from that Peru side in 1970, and it just stuck in my brain, you know. And here am I, a kid who's never, from parents who've never been further north than Coventry. So the rest of the world, even France. I remember we went on holiday to Folkestone or something like that, and they're the lights of France. You know, it just seems impossibly glamorous and unbelievably far away. And here's Peru. And you just look at him, and everything about this football sticker, you know, just the way that he looks, and especially how wonderfully exotic that shirt is, and that's a memory that is just engraved on my mind and in my soul, and probably set me off on the whole thing of wanting to be involved in football on a kind of global basis. So no doubt about it, Peru's the kit for me.
And is that Peru shirt more Arsenal than it is Tottenham? Or the other way around?
It's a little bit of a mixture, I think, because it's a white background. Yeah. It's a white background, so there's more Tottenham there than there is Arsenal. Because, you know,
they've got white as well in their colours. Remember that?
Yeah, but only on the sleeves.
Yeah, but their shorts as well. Their shorts as well.
But all right. It's a symbol, if you like, of North London unity.
What was that, Mark?
Have we unearthed the closet gooner this evening?
Yeah. He's always there. He always lurks in Tim.
He's got to jab away, and he's got to jabbing away. Gleeson, you know, with that height advantage that he has, he really works behind his jab. In fact, I've got a question for the Glees, which is, does the Club World Cup play big in Africa, or does it only play big in Africa when an African team gets to the final, which obviously isn't the case this year?
It is, in my opinion, has been over the last 10 years, particularly really exclusively a South American event. It's the only place that really gets excited about it. I mean, when Mazembe got into that final, when they beat, I think, who did they beat? Corinthians or Internacional in the semi-final, got to the final, 2009, I think, or 2010. There was, you know, there was plenty of coverage of that, but I must say, it came up on me and sort of hit me across the head, really, that this thing was happening. And were out within, opening game and didn't do terribly well in the playoff either, which was a big disappointment. But no, I think they really got to look at that tournament now, because it's got so much potential to be something more expansive for the rest of the world, and particularly for South America. And, you know, hopefully now with the Confederation Cup on its last legs, that slot might be in place for a future Club World Cup. But we certainly need a much better tournament than the one we've had since 2000, 2001. Yeah, it's really something that the South Americans and only the South Americans get excited about.
Mike, in Essex, has come back to you with regarding the business of football, Mark, and I suppose he wants you to join in as well, Tim, talking about when teams that have so much money like Man City running away with the league over here currently, and Man United, less finance, but nevertheless much more so than other teams, that when they have so much money, unlimited funds, as he puts it, that it creates an unlevel playing field and it destroys football. Mark first, though.
Yeah, I don't subscribe to the fact that it destroys football. It does distort it a little bit, but I think it does. I mean, you look at the whole Blackburn thing, which I think is the forerunner to what you've seen, the revolution that you've seen in Britain, in England, with moneyed owners. I thought it brought a freshness to the English game, and it is, although you have a 5-team league, it's still a fascinating league. And we in South Africa have a similar situation. We've got one or two clubs owned by billionaires who outspend everybody else, but they're not necessarily always on top. And when they are on top, it is an exciting affair. And what they've done in a sense also is open the possibility now for South African teams to do well in continental competition, because they can afford the squads that you need for to win the African Champions League is an absolute ultra marathon. It's a little bit like the Copa Libertadores, but I think on steroids, and you really need resources. You need a lot of money. And what's happened across Africa over the decades is it's the sort of state sponsorship of the Egyptian sides and the Tunisian sides. They get a lot of money from the state to help them with the expenses and transport, and they're almost buying continental glory for the image of their country. And now you're getting a much more of a level playing field because you've got these rich people able to sponsor genuine bids for the African title. So I found it fascinating. I think it has distorted a little bit, but I don't think it's the great these moneyed owners or the great ogres that perhaps they're being painted out to be these days. I think they have done something very positive as well for the game.
But nevertheless, from a South American perspective, Tim, isn't this where the great fault line between fans, supporters, and the club separate ways? The example that Mark gave there of Blackburn, for example, it always strikes me with interest that, this isn't a criticism of him at all, but nevertheless, whenever I see Alan Shearer talk about his football career, he's invariably talking about Newcastle rather than the team that he won the Premier League with, which is Blackburn. And there is the kind of loyalty that you would expect when teams have so much money that they can buy players for any sum of money from Southampton or whatever it might be, and put them into their team and they win the league as a result of it. It never seems quite as if it's, real for football fans.
Yeah, although you do get quality as a result. You get a quality spectacle as a result. It does seem that there's two words that seem to have been forgotten very, very quickly. That's Leicester followed by City, because they managed to do it. So that was a kind of reassertion, if you like, that it isn't just the money, but it's never just the money anyway. And with what Man City are doing at the moment, it's not just the money. It's the money coupled with the idea. And that's the thing that from my perspective is so absolutely fascinating. You're getting Guardiola coming, and he needed a season there to bed in, to understand the league, to try this, to try that. And with the amount of money he's got, he's been able to solve those problems. But you're getting a real quality spectacle, and I would rather have that. I think there's a nostalgia, and I understand the nostalgia for the way that things were. But sometimes that nostalgia is held by people who aren't old enough to remember what it was like. And the pitches in the old days were absolutely terrible in English football. They were awful. They were. And the groundsman got the job as a favour, not because he knew anything about it. The atmosphere in the stadium, and I understand people who are saying that lots of community values have been lost. Yes, that's true to an extent, but also the environment now is much more inclusive for women and people from ethnic minorities.
You're right. And don't forget, we played on the exact same pitches in the school first 11. Exact same type of pitches. Right. Yeah, there was a closeness between us and them.
yeah, there was. But
isn't that a valid point? Isn't that a valid point?
You do want to see.
We've lost him for a minute. Hello. Hopefully we'll get him back. Meanwhile, though, we've got Stuart in Belfast with us as well. Good morning, Stuart.
Hi, Dotun. Long-time listener, intermittent caller. Before I ask a question, if I may give a suggestion.
Yeah, of course.
I believe you guys were struggling last week to come up with a Brazilian shirt name for one of our callers.
Yeah,
and I realize Sean Wheelock is not with us, the arbiter, of course.
Of course.
Things, but
you're definitely a long-time listener.
if I could suggest Vasco da Gama for our caller last week.
Oh, very good. Oh, very
brilliant.
Good. And we should explain
I've been sitting on that. I had to podcast it. Unfortunately, it was working late, so I didn't get to ring. And I was listening, and it's been burning at me all week.
Listen, I'm glad it's been burning at you because the World Football phone-in isn't just for Christmas Saturday mornings. You know what I mean? It should burn with you all week long in any case. Now, hang on.
It hangs around. But my question would be...
Can I just say something? Vasco da Gama, for those who don't know, we needed a Brazilian shirt name for one of the guests who was 2 weeks ago with us here for the World Football Phone-in 20th anniversary. And he's a teacher. His missus is a teacher. His missus got in touch last week because, you can't ask for a Brazilian shirt name yourself. So his missus got in touch, unbeknownst to him, as far as I know. And we were trying to save their relationship, really. Sorry, what was that?
But if I recall, according to the rules, he's only going to get it if he says he doesn't like it, right?
Well, That's strictly not the rules. That's just my interpretation of the rules. That's just strictly not the rules. But
depends how much he wants to bully someone.
No, not to. It's just the referee doesn't always see it from the perspective of you lot who've got the benefit of hindsight in different camera angles. I only see it from one angle, you see. But would this be a shirt name with video review? Would this be a video review? I think it would have to be. But there's another one that we have to review, that came in very late last week, Stuart, and it is Matt Letizia.
Oh, very good as well.
It's not bad, is it? It's not bad.
That's far better.
That was points for just sort of like the cringe factor there.
Well, you say cringe, but you laughed. You burst out of laughter when I said Matt Letizia.
The more obtuse a pun is, the better in my.
So, okay, Vasco da Grama's up there. We'll have to keep Matt Letizia in there as well. In fact, I hope Matt is listening. When he listens and he calls in, so Matt, if you're calling in at any time, because his name is Matt as well, that's why Matt Letizia works. But if you're listening, Matt, or if Matt's missus is listening, please tell Matt to give us a call. Then we can review this with the benefit of the what do they call it? The football panel afterwards, who will review to see if he got the goal or whether it was handball. Yeah, dubious goals committee. That's right. We'll have our dubious Brazilian.
It was a dive. It was a clear dive.
No, we've got to introduce VAR to the world football.
Oh yeah, we should, and we should have a dubious Brazilian shirt names committee. That's what we'll have for him. So Matt, give us a call at some point. Anyway, you want to talk about other things as well?
Yeah, my question was, I was considering, often when people are talking about the greatest players of all time, a lot of the time they kind of couch that in achievements. And if you consider it's as Tim is wont to say, you're part of a collective context, which seems to me you're kind of judging the violinist by the orchestra. But
here comes George.
In terms of pure, absolute latent ability, natural talent, whatever you want to call it, who would be the greatest players you've seen in your particular region? Because I don't think it always matches up necessarily with.
That's a good question, because Tim's always going on, if you haven't won a World Cup, then you can't be considered as being the greatest player. But
I'm not sure.
Well, you do sometimes.
I'm confused. I say it because that's used as a stick to beat Lionel Messi with. I
think he's the best I've seen in my lifetime by a distance. He sort of makes the fantastic seem mundane almost. You almost underrate him by how consistently ridiculous he is. And Ronaldinho managed it for 2 seasons really at that level. Yeah. Messi's managed it for borderline a decade.
And I know you didn't mean to cut Mark off, but he wanted to respond. You were trying to respond to the analogy about the violinist and the orchestra as well, weren't you, Mark?
Yeah, I was suggesting here comes a George Best question, and I think that's that's maybe a reference that you had in the back of your mind, and I would say
I'm actually I'm quite atypical because I know the idea that Pelé said that George Best was the best player of all time is actually a myth. I'm realistic. I'm more cosmopolitan in that sense because it's something that we like to sort of hold on to in this neck of the woods, but there's no record of Pelé ever.
Oh, you see,
uttering those words.
Mark's prejudice of people from Belfast slipped out a little bit there, didn't it? Yeah. Mark, do you want to go first?
I would say that we have an equivalent on this continent. I'd say we have an equivalent on this continent in George Weah. Similar sort of circumstance, national team that never really achieved, the standout player for his country by a country mile, and no one really else around him to back him up, and so unable to achieve really collectively, but individually, what an outstanding player, and what a player to watch. And if that's going to be the criteria, is who's the greatest, one of the nicest players you ever saw on a regular basis. I completely concur with your assertion about Messi, and I think we live in a privileged time to on in my case television every week. But George Weah was also something special, perhaps not Messi-esque, but close up there.
That goal against Verona was.
Yeah,
that's
the one.
Yeah.
Well, that's you need something like that, one moment like that everybody remembers you for. But it'd be great.
And it's amazing that there are a lot of players who've achieved that sort of thing on the back of something like that. And it makes me think, and Tim might back me up on this, that John Barnes' career being sort of established by that goal he scored at the Maracanã against Brazil. So, it had something similar about it too. And it launched a great career. It's interesting how many players.
Speaking of, sorry, Mark. Speaking of naturally talented players, and I find it's maybe the sort of, I don't know, sort of inconsistent kind of genius kind of player is a player that's been absent, I think, in many senses from Africa in recent times, but. Just in terms of pure talent, I remember watching some things JJ Okocha could do with the ball when he was in his pomp. And I don't think you really see that kind of player so much anymore, the kind of pure sort of unhinged talent.
But it's like, if you've got sort of tricks is one thing, then, be part of a footballing circus, but you have to be able to perform and execute those tricks on the field of play with an opposition trying to stop you. JJ Okocha is great. He can do lots of little tricks, but he doesn't defeat the opposition with them. I might be wrong. I'll get Mark's view on that in a moment or two. We'll certainly hear from Tim on which is the best individual player from South America. Who is the South American Messi, if that makes sense? Yeah, let's take him out of the equation. Give us a call. 08085 909 693 and tell us your question on football in Africa or football in South America for our Springboka junior, Mark Gleeson, who is in Cape Town, and for our Legendinho, Tim Vickery, who is in Rio. Talk about football in Africa and South America and players from over there playing in our leagues. You never know. You never know. You may be hired. No, not by us, but you may be hired nevertheless. Oh, talking of being hired, I spent 15 minutes of my life, and it's probably about 20 minutes of my life this week, 20 minutes that I will never get back, watching Tim Vickery on Portuguese or Brazilian telly arguing about defence, And it's fascinating, isn't it? Because even though you don't understand a single word that he's saying, you kind of get the sense...
he's speaking a load of rubbish.
Oh, no. This is that defence argument that he put forward, yeah. How you got solid up your defence at the back. Yeah, I can see it now. I can see it in his eyes, in his hand movements. I know exactly what he's talking about. It was fascinating.
What are you doing watching that?
I don't know. At the moment, I just thought, let me just look at this for a minute. And then 20 minutes later, I was still... What impressed me was how so much easier it is for you on Brazilian television, because you don't have interruptions from people like myself and Mark saying, well, they sit there and listen to you almost as if you're some university lecturer.
To sleep.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, the question that Stuart...
It's a hell of a shirt, though. A great shirt.
I can't remember this shirt. You have so many. The question... I'm sorry about the shirt. I don't remember the shirt. Anyway, the question that Stuart Belfast was asking about the greatest individual player from South America that isn't Lionel Messi that you've seen.
Yeah, well, the great Argentine coach, Cesar Menotti, and he once said that one of the hardest things to do with a talented individual player is try and convince him that the game is in fact collective, because he wants to show off. And I can think of examples of players with just unbelievable ability. I mean, some people might remember Carlos Alberto, who was a very young man, scored a goal for Porto in the final of the Champions League. I think that's back in maybe 2004.
Yeah,
and never
on the bench.
That's the one. And never really did anything after that. I mean, he was still playing this year. I don't think he's got a club at the moment. And I watched a lot of him because I watched him on the way up, before he got to Porto. And there's so much talent there, but he never seemed to understand the game. He never seemed to understand that the point of that point that you were making, Dotun, about all right, the skill that doesn't help you win the game. If you've beaten a man, play him out of the game. You know, there's a time to move the ball. If you've beaten him, then move the ball on, because then he's no longer part of the opponent's defensive block. If you want to just stay there and showboat some more, then that fella you've just beaten, you've got to beat him all over again because he's back in the game. And sometimes for the very, very gifted individual player, it's hard for him to understand that. There have been others who've been absurdly skillful who haven't done anything like as much as what they could have done, because maybe they wanted to showboat more than they wanted to win the game. And there was a fellow, a Brazilian called Jalminha, who played in Brazil. He played in Spain. Would have gone to the 2002 World Cup had he not headbutted his coach at La Coruña. But he was a little bit like that, absurdly talented, could do everything. But, you know, football is about not just doing everything, it's about doing the right thing. It's a game of decisions. And that, I think, is, and Mark has alluded to it, I think, that is a huge part of the greatness of Lionel Messi, and how he makes the right decision, how he simplifies things. And we really are privileged to live in this era where you got him, and in a different style, you got Cristiano Ronaldo, year after year after year. This is not normal. Let's enjoy these players while they're around, because we ain't going to enjoy them forever.
Yeah, what about that, Mark? Was I being unfair when I was talking about JJ Okocha in that way? Because Tim has pretty much summed up my feelings about JJ Okocha. Brilliant individual skills, but what good did that do for, I don't know so much about his club career, but certainly for his national career?
Yeah, I think you might be underselling him a little bit. I mean, his impact on the team was massive. And granted, he was surrounded by some other very good Nigerian players, and it was a golden Nigerian generation. You think of Sunday Elisa, of course, Kanu came a little bit later, Fadidi George out wide. It really was a very attacking, very classy side. But Okocha did put it together in a way, and Okocha had a good eye for a pass. He certainly was no show pony. Look, he had all the tricks. He did show off here and there, but he wasn't a show pony, and he could also deliver an absolutely fabulous pass. And you know, you don't play at teams like PSG on the back of a Carlos Alberto style career. I think he was a little bit. He was cut from a little bit of a different cloth, but certainly skills-wise, an absolute gem to watch.
I stand corrected.
Mark, how do you think that this Nigerian generation going into the Russia World Cup, how do you think it compares with that golden generation from the 90s?
Nowhere near the class of the 90s, and it's a little bit of a lucky generation in the sense that they're beginning now to tap into. I suppose lucky is the wrong word, but I mean, they're beginning to tap now into the diaspora, the Dotuns of this world, where Iwobi and etc. But and there's obviously that's obviously a market that's going to increase. It's going to change Nigeria a little bit in terms of their national side. But I think they had a very good qualifying campaign, but it might be a little misreading. I think there's not enough quality in the side. They still rely very much on Victor Moses, who can play. He's off and on. They rely still a lot on Obi Mikel, who's well past his best age-wise, and what's left in his legs. Defensively, very, very inexperienced. So kudos to Nigeria in the way that they qualified for the World Cup. This was a very tough group with Cameroon and Algeria and Zambia along the way. Very impressive.
It sounds like we're going to get.
I'm not sure. I'll tell you what. I'm sure. This is nowhere near the side of the Okocha side, but and they might sort of fail to deliver a little bit in Russia. I fear that. I hope not.
Lots of questions, by the way. Oh, and Jake in Dundalk was the person that had mentioned or offered Matt Letitia, which he's asked me to correct because it might ruin his chances. Anyway, he's talking about a cross-border rivalry between him and Stuart as to what the Brazilian shirt name should be I didn't even think of that. What the Brazilian shirt name should be for.
Let's have a Good Friday agreement on this one.
And the EU's going to scupper that apparently. Anyway, let's leave that to one side for now. Marwan says,
able to wear the shirt as you cross the open border.
Yeah, there won't be much of an open border if they have their way. Is that or what they want? Yeah, if we have our way, or if anyway, let's leave it to one side.
Well, if someone gets their way,
exactly. Tim and Mark, I'm Marvan. I just woke up missing about 2 hours from the show. Well, 2 hours, 1 hour 14 minutes. Yeah, from the show as I tried to keep my eyes from sleeping to hear the show live for the first time. It's a hard one, isn't it? I've been listening to the show for just a few months. I think I'm the only newcomer to the show, as I hear people hearing the show for 40 years or so. No, you're not the only newcomer. Had a new caller tonight, for example. So in Egypt, where I live, fans are not allowed to attend games that make football tasteless in Egypt. So what does Mark think of the fan situation in Egyptian football? And does Tim in his region have a period of time where fans were not allowed into games as well? And what about Salah? Yeah, Mo Salah. Mark, what do you think of him so far? And what about him retiring after playing for 10 years in Liverpool, hopefully as a Liverpool fan? And by the way, in just 2 months, I'm already a huge fan of the show, especially you, Dotun. You are the best presenter ever. Hang on, what did you say? Especially you, Dotun. You are the best presenter ever. That's very kind of you to say. I'll say it one more time, just in case not everybody heard it. Anyway, Mo Salah, first of all, African Footballer of the Year, Mark. Was it the right choice?
No, in my opinion, Aubameyang should have got it, but it's pretty tight this year. It's Salah, it's Mane, it's Aubameyang. They're all pretty close. That's the BBC award that you're talking about. There is still the actual African Footballer of the Year award to come early January. But the BBC one is always a good. It's a bit like the Golden Globes ahead of the Oscars. It always gives you a good indication of what's going to happen on the night. So I think Salah's got a great chance, and of course he's done Egyptian football a massive turn over the last year. Really almost single-handedly putting them in their first World Cup since 1990, and that's good to see. Re the crowds.
Yeah, Mark.
Ever since the Arab Spring. Sorry, Dotun.
Yeah, no, I was going to say we lost you for a moment, but Emma, you said re the crowds, yeah.
Yeah. You've had the Arab Spring, and you had that massive stadium tragedy in Port Said, and ever since then, the authorities in Egypt have restricted the number of supporters. I mean, it's been really bad for football in Egypt. There are some games behind closed doors. There are some games with small crowds. There are some games where they allow a full stadium. The big stadium in Cairo is no longer used. All the big matches get moved away to the coast to Alexandria. Some of them were down on the Red Sea as well in the past. All basically because they feel that a lot of the political dissent is fomented on the terraces, and it's something that's I think football can be very proud of over many forums in many countries and over many decades. That political dissent in totalitarian states, one of the few outlets, one of the few places you've been able to chant a few things and maybe break the shackles of the state is on the football terraces. And that's what they're scared of in Egypt and in Tunisia as well.
Donald says, Tim, regarding dribbling past a player more than once, when you were a nipper, whenever the great Celtics defence wanted a breather, Jinky Johnston was encouraged to take the ball for a walk by beating the same defender, not just once, but over and over and over again, which he duly did. Great fun, but a little bit cheeky, isn't it? Once you've done it, you don't want to show off, you don't want to embarrass the defender, as it were.
There have been times recently in Brazilian football where that's been called as a foul. Can you believe it? Something like that, humiliating. It would be seen as humiliating the opponent, and the referee has called it as a foul.
Yeah, we've had that too.
Right, absolutely astonishing. Because for me that is part of football. That's part of it. But that the game is played in such a hot-tempered atmosphere that something like that can really fire up both sides and lead to a brawl. So I even remember a time not very long ago when a player for overdoing the dribbling, there's nothing in the laws of the game against it. He got given a yellow card.
And in Africa, you were saying the same thing's happening over there, Mark?
It has happened. The showboating is a massive part of the game, particularly in this country, and it's now being increasingly frowned upon. A lot more of the sort of Anglo-Saxon sensibilities of respect for your opponent, etc., are creeping into the game, and that's rather delightful. Mickey take is what I would call it of an opponent is increasingly being frowned upon, which is sad to see because it's not necessarily a vindictive thing that's done if you understand the local player. It's part of the entertainment factor, and they sort of the killjoys are killing it, as it were.
Yeah, Dave has offered another shirt name for our intrepid teachers. Is saying, they are a couple after all and very much in love. So may I respectfully suggest Mathrodytes. All the best and happy Christmas. That was all right. I thought, nothing wrong with that. I haven't got a problem. Yeah.
No, it's very clever.
Yeah, at least people are thinking at this time of the morning. It's always impressive to actually get one that comes out of nowhere. Yeah, none of us thought of that, mate. None of us thought of that. Yeah, well, Mark in Singapore says, Mr. Gleeson.
He's so tall he can get away with these things.
Oh, yeah, from that distance he can. But I have to meet Henry again, Mark Gleeson, with regards to the 1993 Zaire team that were killed in the plane crash, if the crash hadn't happened, how different
Zambia, wasn't it?
Zambia was Zambia.
Yeah, Zambia. You're right. It's not Zaire. Yeah, Zambia. If that crash hadn't happened, how different would African football be? Is a question from Mark in Singapore.
I don't think it impacted across the continent. I think Zambian football might have been a lot more successful. They might have had a bit of a better run in the continental competitions. Although, ironically, because what happened directly after the tragedy is they had already qualified or pretty much qualified for the African Nations Cup in 1994, which was in Tunisia. They had one or two more games to go, but they were pretty secure in their group, and they were also chasing a place in the USA. And I think had the team not died in that tragedy, they probably would have had a better chance, but would maybe not have been assured of a place at the World Cup finals in the USA. But they rebuilt the side. In fact, the Danes donated quite a lot of time, a few coaches and facilities in Denmark, and they went to Denmark with, let's say, 30, 40 players and sort of basically put together a new national side. And remember, the two best Zambian players were not on that plane. They were joining the team was flying from Lusaka to Senegal, and it was at a refueling stop in Gabon where the accident happened. But the two best players were Kalusha Bwalia, who played for PSV Eindhoven. He was coming down directly from Holland, along with Charlie Musonda from Anderlecht in Belgium. So, with those two players as the backbone, they built a brand new side. Who actually 6 months later went to the final of the African Nations Cup in Tunisia, where they lost to Nigeria. It was only the second time ever that Zambian football or that Zambia got to the final of a Nations Cup. So. It was a great generation of wonderful players, and I think Zambia would have done a lot better than they did. But ironically, the newly built side, within 6 months of the tragedy, were playing in the final of the biggest tournament on the continent. So, without taking anything away from those who died, it certainly was a very quick turnaround for Zambia. And they've always been consistently amongst the top 10 on the continent, always there and thereabouts.
Yeah, and you'll understand the brogue in this one, Tim. Red-headed Jinky Johnson, Wisney Anglo-Saxon. He was a Celtic player. Gary says, could you ask Mark how Koulibaly is doing in Egyptian football, as I'm a Killy fan, as he says?
Who's that?
Koulibaly.
I have no idea. Koulibaly, was he playing in the UK?
I thought that was the name of the team, but Koulibaly? No, don't worry about that.
Very common surname, isn't it? Was it someone who played for Kilmarnock? Is that the point that's being made? The link that's being made?
Ah, I get it. Yeah. Kilmarnock as in Killy. Koulibaly. Oh, don't worry if you don't know about him. You don't know about him. What about how good was Charlie Musonda, Chelsea's Belgian player?
Yeah, well, I don't know how good this is the son of.
Oh yeah, hang on. He wants to know about the father actually. How good was Charlie Musonda, Chelsea's Belgian player? Father. He was part of the team but didn't travel.
Yeah, he was a massive player for Zambia. Wonderful midfielder.
Okay, I've got you. Sorry, I'm confusing those two questions. I'm sorry. I mashed up the last minute or so of the World Football Folio. I do apologise because you'd already answered that.
No, I hadn't answered the question about how good he was, and he was a great midfielder, and he had a wonderful career at Anderlecht in Belgium, and he's still there today as one of the youth team coaches, and he's got these two sons who, one is on Chelsea's books, the other one is also playing professional football, and the Zambians would desperately like to have them, but they're both Belgian youth internationals, and hopefully still might declare for Zambia.
Marion in Hampshire says she's bought for a football mad older brother a book about Alan Ball called The Man in the White Boots for Christmas.
Yeah, I saw that. I nearly bought that at Heathrow Airport on the way back, and I regret not buying that. That looked like a really interesting book.
Yeah, Alan Ball, red hair, white boots that could turn on a sixpence. Right. Don't forget, it had that little trick at the front, didn't it? You could turn it on a sixpence. You know what I mean?
I never had a pair of the boots.
We couldn't afford that. I mean, I never had a pair of boots. Period. The boots that we had, we got from Woolworths, and they were like rugby boots. Actually, in those days, you know?
They were.
Yeah,
ankle. Remember how long the laces were?
Oh yeah.
The pitches were so muddy that afterwards you could never get the laces undone because they were just absolutely caked in mud.
Don't get me wrong.
They don't know they're born these days. They don't know they're born.
Don't get me wrong. We treated those boots as if they were the ones worn by Bobby Charlton. We treated them with love and attention. I can tell you that.
They were so heavy. It's a wonder you could move in them.
Well, they crack people's ankles as well. It's no wonder that we haven't all been crippled as a result of playing.
This is increasingly like one of those Monty Python skits. Tell the kids to back.
Talking of which, when I were a lad, so you've got a wedding to go to on the day of the FA Cup final. What do you do? Mark first.
Do you have an FA Cup final ticket, or you just want to watch it on television?
Hey, you've got pride of place at the FA Cup. You've got the best ticket in the stadium. What do you do?
Whose wedding is it? If it's not your own, go to the FA Cup final.
Yeah. I'm with you all the way on that one.
If it's not your own, but it's your brother's. It's your brother's wedding.
You'll get there for the reception in the evening. What's the problem?
Yeah. And you can accuse him of bad timing for the rest of his life.
So that has solved that issue. that has solved one of the most pressing issues of state that we are currently having to deal with here in the United Kingdom. But thank you very much.
Do you know, some friends of mine got married a few years ago, and there was only one person of their friends not invited to the wedding ceremony, only invited to reception, and that was me. And that was because before they'd started going out, she'd said to me, "I think I might go out with him if he were taller." And she was honestly worried at that moment when the priest or whoever he is, he says, does anyone here have any reason why these people should not get married? She was genuinely worried that I would say, your worship, or whatever you're supposed to say. I distinctly recall that she said, and you know what? She was absolutely right. So just as well that I didn't go. Go to the reception afterwards, and after enjoying the FA Cup final. The joy that you will have from going to the FA Cup final, you will then spread around the wedding reception and everyone wins.
This might tickle you, Mark. This is from Alistair, who's a former Durban resident. He's living in Knee Concord in Ohio, stateside now. He says, can you ask Mark... Tim, don't make any musical references to this, please, okay? Restrain yourself, okay? Can you please ask Mark for background on the Amazulu versus Cape Town City game last night? Two recently reformed sides. I was struggling with that one as well.
How are 5 women going to take on a team of 11
Do you know
men?
what
It's
I was
not
thinking
fair.
of? What I was thinking of
What?
is, do you remember the young ones? When they played on the young ones, they had that little hamster that says, I'm a Zulu, I'm a Scotsman. Anyway, sorry, Mark. Sorry, I'm sure it's not funny to you. Anyway, I knew them, by the way. The bass player I knew really well. She lived up in Islington. Claire, something, I can't remember her surname, apologies.
There was a band called Amazulu.
What position did she play?
There was a band called Amazulu, and they performed on this TV program and said, now here comes Amazulu. And then they had this little puppet that says, I'm a Zulu, I'm a Scotsman. Honestly, it was funny at the time. Can you ask Mark for the background on the Amazulu versus Cape Town City game last night? 2 recently reformed sides, thanks to takeovers of other teams. Anything untoward, suspicious, especially about Amazulu switching leagues with the team they bought, Royal Zulu? Also, perhaps the Springboka Juniors' first shirt could be Cape Town City, whose kit looks like his namesake Boca Juniors kit. Yeah?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Amazulu were relegated from the top flight in South Africa 2 seasons ago, and they missed out on promotion for a second successive year. So what they did was they bought the status of the side that won promotion, offered them enough money and said, well, can we go in your place? And that's basically what happened. They are back up in the top flight, but not deservedly so, because they were able to persuade the team that actually won the second division to sell their franchise. Cape Town City were formerly based in Nelspruit, which is near the Kruger Park, and they were a team called Black Aces. They were sold to a businessman down here in Cape Town, and he's renamed the team, and this is their second season now in their new colours. It's not an uncommon thing in South African football. It's a little bit of the American-style franchise system. And if you've got enough money and you want to move the club around and rechange the name, you can do so. There's none of that sort of geographical tradition that you have in the UK with the local side from Rochdale or Chester or wherever it is, lasting 100 years. Here it's a bit more sort of economically expedient.
You might remember the email that I read out from our listener Marvan in Egypt. Well, he just sent me another one. Says, I'm over the moon that you read my email. OMG, OMG. It's a dream come true. And you are still the best presenter ever, Dotun. Oh, does he do it just for me to read that bit out? I'm not sure. How good is the Brazilian Kennedy who plays for Chelsea, Tim? I bought him in Football Manager and he was fantastic, says Mark in Leeds.
Yeah, I was a little bit. I think a lot of people over here were a little bit surprised that Chelsea bought him, and then surprised that he got in the first team, and surprised with the position that he got in the first team, because here, when he played for Fluminense, he played wide right, very left-footed, a little bit like Hawke, left-footed right winger. You give him space, very physically powerful. He'll cut in onto his stronger left foot, and he can give the ball a blast. But you wondered with English football whether he'd find that space, and sure enough, Chelsea converted him, I think, initially to a left back, which wasn't a position that anyone had imagined him filling over here. But physically strong. I think at the top level he's not going to be a great attacker, just because I think he needs that space in which to operate. And he heaped shame upon himself in that pre-season tour to China with his social media comments that were an offence to the Chinese people. He made a few of them as well. And I think Chelsea disciplined him there. So hopefully he's learned his lesson. Physically strong, interesting, but I don't think he's got enough subtlety about him to be a world beater.
By the way, Chris in Edinburgh says that line from the young ones was, I'm a Zulu, is that right? I'm a Glaswegian. Honestly, it gets funnier. And also, Mark, Gary has responded by saying that Solomon Koulibaly was who he was talking about. Solomon Koulibaly was who we were talking about earlier. He played for Kilmarnock. Then he went to play for one of the Cairo teams. I think it might be El Zamalek. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I must say the number of El Zamalek games, Dotun, is that I've watched is probably akin to the number of readouts that you had from doting fans calling you the number one presenter on radio.
Well, it's very kind of you to say so once more, in case anybody didn't hear it the first 29 times. Well, you never know. You never know. It might be. Oh, Anand said, donated by a speech broadcast of the year. Yeah. We are cheering you on. Thank you very much. I thought you were going to ask a question, because obviously I was going to read out your question once you started in that wonderful way. Yeah, okay. One about food at Christmas time, obviously intended for me. This one is from Mark, who says, does Tim do any breakout Brazilian dialects on Brazilian TV? The way he does his Brum.
No, I don't do that. No.
The way that you do your Brum and your Jock Steen accents on the phone.
It's early in the morning. I'm doing it on very, very little coffee.
How would it go down?
Just trying to keep coherence.
How would it go down in Brazil?
No, I don't think it would go down very well at all. But as a foreigner, you're kind of treading on eggshells anyway, you know. Yeah. So let's not tempt fate too much.
Yeah. Okay. Just checking because it's easy to do them over here, isn't it? And we all appreciate them, of course we do, but nevertheless. There's a point of order. I can't believe Gleeson has never heard of Amazulu. Surely everybody knows that they were too good to be forgotten.
Oh,
did you get that?
Very
Mark?
good, very good.
Well, I presume that's a song title, right?
Yeah. Well presumed. Yeah. They're not the only person who said that. Oh, there's lots of people who've said that. Weren't the Amazulu team too good to be forgotten, says Richard in Stony Kirk as well. Yeah. Brilliant. Everybody's on the Amazulu tip tonight, Mark. And you're going to have to leave this phone in and go out.
The song.
Yeah, you're going to have to do your research.
Shylight's original, actually.
Were they any good?
The cover version.
You've asked that a couple of times. Like I said, each time you've asked me if they were any good, I've said, I know the bass player.
Okay.
Oh, God. Even she, I don't think, would go that far. She went on to play for Hank Wangford afterwards. Do you remember Hank Wangford?
Well, I do, yeah.
Yeah, he did his Jogging for Jesus. Do you remember that one? I'm Jogging for Jesus. That was a good tune, actually. That was
he played for Kilmarnock.
No, he doesn't play. No Kilmarnock connection. However much you try and squeeze it in. What about this from Jelani? Can the Legendinho tell me more about King Arthur of Gremio potentially moving to Barcelona? King Arthur?
He's a lovely player, and what a shame that Artur is not. He's unfit. He got injured in the second leg of the Libertadores final, so he's not with Gremio in a few hours' time when they take on Real Madrid for the prize of the World Club Cup. And that has an impact on that game because Gremio are a possession-based side, and he, who's come into the first team as recently as May, really, but he's become the fulcrum of their passing game. And he reminds me so much, and some people think of him as a prototype Xavi. I think of him a little bit more perhaps as a prototype Iniesta, because the way that he can pass the ball in a complete arc. You know, he can give passes off in 360 degrees. And he's also got that kind of skipping forward run. He'll just skip to the edge of the box and play a quick 1-2. I think he's got a huge, huge future. Now, Barcelona are obviously very interested in this player, and they sent out one of their directors, and rather unwisely, Artur was photographed in a Barcelona shirt. And before any formal approach to Gremio had been made from the club. So there's a little bit of bad blood there. But Brazilian football is basically these days, unfortunately, it's an export industry, so he's going to go at some time soon. I think he's one of those players who I think is good enough to get straight into top-class European football, as has happened with Gabriel Jesus. You know, just walked straight in. Some are good enough for it. Some find it too much of a step up. I don't think it would be the case for him. I think he's a wonderful player who has a huge future in European club football and also with the Brazilian national side, perhaps even in next year's World Cup.
Thank you. Right, we've got another one for both of you, actually. This one from our listener who's talking about Celtic, you know, having dominated Scottish football for years. Well, once upon a time there were two, but now there's one, arguably. But the second one's coming up, if you know what I mean. But and our listeners saying that are there any other teams in your respective regions? This is Rory, in your respective regions that are doing this. You know, like Manchester City, essentially, seem to be doing this season in the league. Who are the teams that dominate the leagues over in Africa, Mark?
In the way that Celtic do in terms of longevity or in terms of how dominant they've been this particular season?
Either one, feel free. Or both, if you like.
Yeah, look, I mean, like many European countries, like your Spain and your Holland, Belgium, Scotland, etc., there are many countries in Africa with sort of 2-3 teams, the same old faces year after year after year. It's tempered off a little bit, surprisingly, in West Africa, where, you know, for many years, for example, you had Ashanti Kotoko as the sort of runaway side in the Celtic of Ghana. But yeah, you've got Al Ahly in Egypt, completely dominant. Esperance in Tunisia. It's a little more competitive in Algeria and Morocco. I'd say in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Mazembe, who've done so well at continental level as well, also have that sort of Celtic-esque dominance. So yeah, there's quite a lot of parallels with the 2 or the 3 team championships that you have in Europe. Portugal is another example as well that I could throw in there.
Now, let's get on with the serious business of talking about teams that dominate the leagues. Over your side, Tim.
Yeah, well, I think the smaller the country, the greater the chance there is of a domination by. It's usually 2 clubs. And the best example is Uruguay, which is certainly in population terms the smallest country in South America, and it really is a duopoly between Peñarol and Nacional. Very, very occasionally a smaller side will get through. And if you read the press coverage in Uruguay, it's like 1/3 Peñarol, 1/3 Nacional, and 1/3 for all of the other teams. So you do get that kind of prolonged domination. The only difference, I think, would be, is that especially these days, especially in the last 2 decades, because South American football is an export industry, what happens is that successful sides always pay the price for that success because they get broken up. Their best players will invariably get sold on somewhere. So that makes it harder for one club to maintain a kind of domination.
Makes
because
it interesting,
doesn't
it? It makes it interesting.
Well, that's the trade-off you have.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the trade-off you have between, say the quality of La Liga, where you Real Madrid and Barcelona are absurdly good, and Atletico Madrid have done magnificently well to kind of compete with them. And you're getting there, with Cristiano Ronaldo and Messi, this kind of domination for a decade that we've never seen before. It's not normal, this, but the price you pay for that quality is the lack of competitive balance. South America at the moment, we're living the other side of the coin, where we lose our quality, but we do have more competitive balance.
We've got Ali with us in South Buckinghamshire. Ali, good morning.
Good morning, Dotun. How are you?
I'm very well. Thanks a lot for calling. Appreciate that. And you've got a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I've got a question for Tim and a question for Mark, if there's enough time.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Lovely. So, first of all, good morning, Tim.
Good morning.
So my question for you is, I've always been struck by your ideas that football is a quasi-linguistic expression of your region. And I was just wondering that for you, as someone who has lived in Brazil for such a long time, have you ever come to forget your own linguistic upbringing of football that you had in the United Kingdom?
Yeah.
And similarly, when you ever come back here to watch games, have you tried to apply the linguistic lessons that you've learned over abroad here?
You're a philosopher,
and furthermore,
yeah.
Have you ever spoken to any players who have almost experienced this multiculturalism, played in a different country, and come to take on their own country's values for their own, replacing their previous ones?
Tim, you're going to have to answer that in 90 seconds if you can. So
this very thought has been going through my head just now, because I was back, a couple of weeks ago and was at Wembley on Wednesday. Was at Wembley on Saturday for Tottenham and was at a game here. in Rio, a big final on Wednesday night. So the way that you see the game, and that rant that Dotun was talking about on Brazilian TV was in part a product of being back home and seeing a different style of football and really a more advanced one. So I do live that kind of thing all the time, and there are certain aspects of the game where I can't express them in English as well as I can in Portuguese, certain concepts of the game, because a language gives you that. It gives you a different window on the world, a different conceptual framework. So sometimes I'm thinking the game in Portuguese rather than in English. Time for a question for Mark.
Yeah, so just a quick one for Mark. I know that in 2010 there were problems with pay, I think, for the Cameroon team, and the same in 2014 with the Ghana team. And in light of Tim's thoughts on how players feel so proud playing for their country in South America, whereas in England it's not so much a source of pride, what's the kind of general view of Africans towards playing for their national teams?
Yeah, I think money is a big part of it. It's not, that sort of banging on the badge and playing for the country is, when you need the cash. I think the quest for money sort of supersedes all of that stuff. But there's obviously massive pride, and people are, African people are very proud of their countries, very proud to be at competitions like the World Cup, but also very happy if they get paid for the experience.
Ali, thanks very much. And I know both of you could have expanded on those questions quite a lot. They're fascinating questions, Ali, I really appreciate you coming on and giving us something to think about in that respect. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And also the kind of question that I'll be thinking about till next week's World Football Phone-In. Oh, apparently, and Mike, you're absolutely right, actually. You're absolutely right. It reminds us that Amazulu, as well as being the band, that Amazulu reference from the young ones was about a pet hamster called SPG. The hamster was called SPG, Special Patrol Group, and it was owned by Vivian, who was Aid Edmondson. Thanks very much for that. Mark, many thanks. And now you've got to go and look up Amazulu on YouTube. Tim, thanks very much.
BBC 5 Live.